kind of what I said.
Sorry.
So for, it's okay. I'll just go through it again. I'm going to record this now. I just realized I hadn't pressed record. So I'm pressing record now. So that way I can post this for everybody else who's not on today. So for the signature assignment, I'm going to go through this one more time. It should be a very well written paper, right? It should be academically focused. There should be a title page. There should be a reference page. There should be an abstract. There should be headers and page numbers. Okay. There should be an introduction and a conclusion. The headers, I do not want you guys to like copy and paste the questions that the assignment asks you and then put those as your headers. That's not what I would like. I would like for you guys to just like, you can take part of that question out to use it as your header for organizational purposes, but don't just like type the question, like what person should I use for individual? Don't put that as your header. Okay. I have seen that before and I just want to make sure that you guys understand that. Like you can put like trauma-informed care, individual clinical theory. Those are fine for headers. But make sure you have, for organization, headers are really important, right? And it's part of APA, but just make sure that they make sense in your paper. You are choosing, you're going to go through kind of everything you've learned in this course so far this summer. So you're going to choose one person from the case model that you would focus on for trauma therapy, like a trauma-informed care, a different person that you would choose for an individual clinical theory. And then for the group stuff, you're going to go through, it could be one of the other same people, or it could be different people, and it could be more than one person. Okay. And then same goes on for that. You're also going to talk about in your paper, a bigger focus. I think I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but I know it brings up, it wants you to talk about the system, right? Like how you would work with different systems in your, yes, the genogram and ecomap embedded in the paper. You can do either one. You can either use it as like you can scan it in your paper, or you can just attach it. That's perfectly fine. I don't really, either one, just make sure you have it included. I've had people had attached it as different files before in Canvas. That is okay. I will see it. But yes, you do need to have a genogram and ecomap included with the paper. And then when you go through, it'll ask about bigger systems, and that means is how you would work together with perhaps the school or like a family social worker, like how the therapist might work together. You also may need to talk about how you might work with because I know there's a DUI in the family case, so you may have to talk about that, like with the criminal justice system. So make sure you do spend a good amount, in that time talking about that. Another thing that I said was to make sure that you guys talk about when you're going through your specific theories, that you do talk about any limitations that theory may have, because I do want to make sure that you guys understand that social work and psychotherapy in general is not like a one theory thing, right? It's very eclectic. Like I'm an EMDR trauma therapist, but I don't just use EMDR, right? I use lots of different theories based on what that person may need. So just please make sure that you guys think about that, use your critical thinking skills, and make sure that you understand that because it's going to serve you better in the future, right? When you understand the limitations there, okay? And you don't have to go on and on and on about it. Just at least mention what may come up, okay? Also for the group that it wants you to go in, make sure you mention, and it says this in the instructions of the paper, but make sure you read it through it again, and that when you're writing your paper that you then review your paper and make sure you included everything, because in the past I've graded these papers 100 times before for many different sections of this class, and this is the common things people miss. So I'm trying to make sure that you guys see that, okay? So on the group, it'll talk about like what leadership style would be seen in the group. Make sure you don't forget that, okay? Just if you write out your paper and then go back and reread the signature assignment, because I have to use the rubric to grade these papers since it's a school mandated, department mandated assignment, okay? So if certain things are not included, I have to dock you on it, okay? So I'm just trying to make sure you guys don't forget those things. So make sure you go through the assignment, and I think the rubric's attached, but just make sure that you have that included, okay? So that you don't get docked on something silly that I know you know, okay? Other than that, it's basically just think of it as it is a big paper, it's a long paper, but I don't have like a page limit. I don't really even look at that. It's more about content, but just make sure that you included all those specific things, okay? Including an abstract, title page, reference page, and the headers. Okay. Questions for the assignment. Open it up. No? You guys feel confident on the assignment?
I wrote something in the chat about like the genogram and the eco map. Like I've had to do those in papers before, and some like, do you prefer it to be like digitally created, hand drawn, and scan? Like I heard you.
Yeah, either one is fine, Bethany. I really don't care. I've seen both, and as long as I can read it, I don't care. I've literally had people take a picture of a piece of paper, that they've drawn it out on.
Okay.
And I don't mind that either, as long as I can read it. I'm not.
Okay.
I don't expect you guys to be pros at creating a genogram on a computer. It's more about just understanding the relationship connections. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay. And I mean, I like reading these papers. I think it's a good way to bring everything together from the semester, but just make sure that you guys reread the assignment. Again, if you talk to your classmates, you guys may have different people assigned to different things, and that's okay, because you guys are social science is not all perfect, right? Like, we have different things at different times. So just please, you can check with them, but know that you may have different people, and that's okay. All right. So that's it on that assignment, unless you guys have any questions, and I'll move on. I wanted to talk a little bit more about trauma today too, just because people have been asking. And obviously, if any questions come up as you're writing your paper, you guys can reach out to me like always, and I'll answer them. But I just wanted to make sure that we were good on that. Trying to make sure. Albert?
Yeah,
yep.
Okay. Essentially, to the best of my knowledge, the assignment, the paper, is an individual paper, right?
Yes.
And secondly, you said even though it is indicated in the instruction that it should be between 12 to 15 pages, you say you are not so particular about.
Nope. It's more about it's more about the content. So I don't care so much about what is in the or how long it is, as long as all the content is there. My experience has been with this paper that if it is done the way it should be done, it's usually going to be between 12 and 15 pages. But I don't count the pages. And honestly, sometimes when people upload to Canvas, it shifts around the spacing. So, I'm not going to look at that, but I go by content. I don't even look at how long the paper is, to be honest with you. But
Okay.
if it's 5 pages, you haven't covered everything. I can guarantee that.
Okay.
Okay, and this is due the 22nd, right? So what's today's date? What's today's date? The 17th? I'm like, I don't even know what day it is, guys. So today is the 17th. It is due on Monday. I may push it out to Tuesday for you guys. Would that be helpful to give you guys an extra day?
Yes.
Okay. I will push it out to Tuesday the 22nd or 23rd. Okay. That should be fine. And I will do that right now before I forget. So you guys get an extra day in there through the weekend as well. Okay. It will be due the 23rd at midnight. Okay. And it is already updated in there, so you should be able to do it. But yeah, it's a pretty, like I said, as long as you go through and how this has like assessment and goals, individual intervention, individual, practice theories, family genogram, those are good headers. So if you're confused about the header comment, the way that it's written in the assignment, that you could do that. Just make sure that what I don't like is like when it's like the whole paragraph, and people have done that before, and it just is it's hard to read it that way. Does that make sense? So make sure that that's done. Any other questions about the assignment? Okay. I'm going to move on then. And I've muted you guys just so we don't have feedback. Okay. And again, you can use the chat feature. This is still recording. And if you guys have any questions as we move forward about the assignment, just let me know. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit, not for very long. I promise I won't bore you guys, but I had some questions about trauma and people wanting me to expand on that a little bit because it is my specialty. So I hope that I won't bore you to tears. But I did want to talk a little bit about it. So, you guys learned at the beginning of this class, if you can remember, about how trauma affects us biologically, right? It changes our brain on a biological level. And we talked a lot about the ACEs and how trauma at the childhood level can stunt growth. It can increase your risk of medical issues, obviously mental health issues, school, drug use, and all sorts of issues. We kind of went through that already when you guys watched that video from Dr. Burke, right? She touched on a lot of that too. But the other thing to make sure we understand is, yes, trauma in childhood is deeply rooted and very important. But we also we don't want to ignore trauma that happens after the age of 18. And that's where I think that the ACEs is limited, right? Because it doesn't ask about questions after the age of 18. It also doesn't ask a lot about emotional trauma, where emotional trauma is just as important as physical trauma. And I know as a trauma therapist, I spend a lot of time digging under emotional issues with my clients who, when I go through the ACEs, they might have a very low score, but then I find out they've been ridiculed and criticized by a parent or an uncle or something for their whole lives. Okay. And this can definitely play a part in like their self-esteem and their fears and their social anxieties. And so while the ACEs is great, it is not all encompassing. And so I just want to make sure that I think everybody that works in a trauma-informed care field needs to make sure that they understand that while screening for childhood trauma is essential, we also need to make sure we're asking the right questions about trauma after the fact, okay? And be sensitive to it because people are going to have different triggers, right? And asking questions like, where does that come from? Where did you first hear that? What is your, what do you think that's about? Tell me more. We ask those open-ended questions that you hear about in motivational interviewing, and those are always important, whether it's before 18 or over 18. Okay. So something else I wanted to talk about was, has anybody heard of the author or scientist Bessel van der Kolk? Yes, I hope. So Bessel van der Kolk, he writes the book Body Keeps the Score. If you do not have a copy of this book, I highly putting it on your to buy list at some point in your career, okay? In my eyes, it's right next to the DSM in terms of a mental health clinician. Okay, we have the DSM we need to know, even if you don't work in mental health, even if mental health and addictions is not your specialty, you need to be familiar with the DSM. Yes, it is the Body Keeps the Score. I'm going to put it in here. The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk. And it is just, I mean, it was life-changing for me as a therapist, as a human. Okay. He has the thing about it is it talks about when our senses become muffled, we no longer feel fully alive. If you have a comfortable connection with your inner body, you feel charge of your body, your feelings, and yourself. And basically, what he is explaining to us is that as we get traumatized over and over and over again, we become desensitized, right, to these traumas. It's a protection mechanism. And if we think about it in modern day stuff, like what's going on in the world today, obviously, if you've watched the news or been on social media at all, you are aware of everything that's been going on with protests, right, and social injustices and stuff like that. And it is very real, right? I'm very active in the community myself with this. And the reason I bring this up is racism is a systemic trauma. It's a systemic trauma, okay? Which means it's an issue that's been going on for, I mean, so many years, right? And it's not done. And when we have people whose relatives have been beaten and killed and, just traumatized. I can't even put it into words because it's so terrible, right? And then they're going to get triggered, right? The stuff that's been going on in the news lately is very triggering, okay? It is very triggering to those who have experienced racism. And that is important to know as a trauma therapist. I have been talking about what the protests and what's been going on in the world every day in my practice, because it's common, right? It's going on right now. So just like COVID, right? COVID-19 is a systemic trauma too, right? It's a pandemic. We're living in the middle of a pandemic. We are making history right now, many different histories, but it's a systemic trauma. It affects all of us a little differently. Some people can go about their day and not even think twice about COVID-19, right? Some of us can't do that. Some of us have family members that are at risk, that some of us are at risk, may have autoimmune issues. Some of us may have already had COVID and recovered. Some of us may have lost somebody from COVID. Okay, so it is a systemic trauma. And I know I went on and on and on, but the basis of this is to remember that these traumas, even though they're going on right now as opposed to our childhood, are changing our brain chemistry a little bit, okay? And the more we've been traumatized before now is going to change how we respond to it right now, okay? Because if we already have that trigger in there, it's going to get activated. It's like, right? When we are traumatized by something, we go into fight or flight, right? So you guys have probably, I'm sure everybody here has experienced this. You get into a scenario where you feel really uncomfortable or scared, and you either freeze, you run away, right? Those are two things that usually happen. Or you may, if you're triggered because you've already been in this situation before, you may act out, right? And that's a trauma response, okay? So that's what happens to our bodies. And when something traumatizing happens to us physically, our brain goes into fight or flight. It goes, no, thank you. I don't want to feel this anymore. Nope. I don't want to know what's going on. And it either, depending on you and depending on your brain and depending on what you've been through before, it may shut down. You may not remember anything, or you may be like, no big deal. I'm good. It's no big deal. Whatever. You may dissociate, which you don't even, and that is a normal response too. And we need to make sure that it's a physical reaction. I have literally had people come to EMDR before and not understand why they get triggered by certain things. And then when we do EMDR, they bring up memories of being in like a playpen or pack and play or a crib and being like left there for hours, okay, from something they can't remember because they were infants, but it was a trauma and their brain remembers it. Their body kept the score. And so I can go on and on and on with examples, you guys, but the basic idea here is to remember that when something traumatic happens to someone, everybody's brain reacts in a different way, but it has a physical and chemical response. And the more trauma that builds upon trauma, okay? Like the people that are at these protests, I have friends there. They've been discriminated against. They've experienced systemic racism, and then they may be in the streets at these protests and get tear gassed. What's happening? More trauma, right? They're fighting back, and they're getting more trauma. And I mean, they're doing what they need to do. Don't get me wrong, but I'm like, they're going to need so many arms, right, reaching out for them. It's more trauma. So from a mental health and psychological standpoint, we just need to understand what trauma does to the body. Okay, it's neuroscience, it's psychopathology, and interpersonal neurobiology. There's like so much that happens. Okay, and you don't have to be a soldier or visit a refugee camp to encounter trauma. Trauma can be in many different ways. And that's why I just want to make sure we see, like I've mentioned some really big traumas and some systemic traumas, but trauma sometimes is just something that is like something that happens with our friends and family. And then we're like, well, that's not a big deal. Right? That's no big deal. I have a great life. But it is a big deal if it made you feel a certain way. Okay? So we need to make sure that we understand it's not a pain Olympics, I always say, right? It's not the pain Olympics. And just remember, it takes a tremendous energy to keep functioning while carrying memory of terror or trauma, and you feel very ashamed and weak and vulnerable. Okay? Your brain has to evolve to monitor for danger, remaining overactivated. So even at the slightest sign of danger, it may be real danger, it may be misperceived danger, it can trigger an acute response and accompanied by intense emotions, overwhelming sensations. And this is when you may even see people like act out, punch people in their sleep when they have PTSD. And we can hurt people that are even very close to us. Okay. So what can we do about it? Okay. Well, the good thing I want you guys to realize, I've said all this like depressing stuff. Trauma is not finite. Are you okay? Sorry guys, I just heard like a huge spider. Oh, my kid just saw a spider. So trauma's not finite, okay? We can undo. I want to say undo because you can't erase the past. That's a bad word. But we can help people heal and move forward, okay? And that is a very important piece. The brain is awesome and it can recover, right? It goes into these fight or flight survival mechanisms to save us, right? And it can also heal to save us. Can we undo years of trauma and hurt? No, but we can help this, like the system, so we don't get so triggered, so we can like live our lives better for ourselves. It's not going to change your thoughts. It's not going to change what happened to you, but it will help you be able to cope. Does that make sense to everybody? And the research does show that as we treat trauma properly, it can help us cope, and it can reduce your risk to all those other things that we mentioned that trauma puts you at risk for. The earlier the intervention, the better, okay? And how do we undo it? With proper treatment. What are some of those treatments we know about? For trauma specifically, there are many, obviously it's the mind-body. You have to have a mind-body connection there for sure, because there's a brain thing and there's lots of things going on. EMDR, obviously, you guys know I've talked about it. It's eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing. It uses bilateral stimulation, so eye movements, left, right, back and forth, or since I've been doing a lot of telehealth lately with the pandemic, I've been using tapping. So I'll have the client like tap their knees left, right, while I process with them. It's got a very like strict format. So I have them bring up a memory and then we rate it. We use a scale, just like you do in some other CBT models. And you use a personal cognition and you rate how they feel about that. And then you let their brain tell you what they need to feel, or what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they remember. And there's a lot of intricacies there I won't go through on this talk, but it is a very good, I mean, in my opinion, it's the best trauma therapy model out there, but it is not the only thing that we do as trauma therapists, okay? The big thing you can do to be trauma informed in your role, whether it's as a therapist, as a health social worker, as an administrator, as a child welfare worker, whatever role you may have in social work, is to be able to recognize when those triggers may be there, to be sensitive to them, to ask open-ended questions, to have space, listen without the intent to always reply. And that's as a therapist in general. We need to listen without often wanting to give our opinion, right? It's not about us, okay? It's about them. Listen and give them space and ask questions and think about those traumas. If somebody has a sexual assault trauma, bringing them into a room and asking them to change in front of people probably isn't going to be trauma informed. Okay. We need more training across the board when it comes to outside of social work agencies, right? And trauma. So in doctors' offices, in dental offices, and community programs and police forces, firefighting, we need more training, right? Social workers are needed to understand these intricacies of trauma. Okay, so I could go on and on about this for hours, and I don't want to do that to you guys. But if you're interested in learning more, I'm going to send you guys an article just for fun. I'm not going to quiz you on it or anything, but really just because I think it helps explain some of the stuff I've been talking about today. And if you guys ever want to know more, you can always reach out to me about trauma. I do it all day long. So I have seen its effect on lots of different ways. Excuse me. I do feel like it is at the root of a lot of our mental health issues. And if we treated it early, we wouldn't have a lot of the mental health stuff we have going on today. So questions, comments, concerns? Was that boring? Everybody's got their pictures up except for Fatima, so she just wants to, she's sitting there, at least she's looking at me and not like sleeping or something. I should put my video on. Yeah, I'm gonna put my video on. I didn't even know my video was off. There I am. See? I didn't even know my video was off. So does anybody have any other any comments? Hope I didn't bore you to tears. Now Bella's gonna come say hello. That's Bella.
Hi.
She was sitting there listening to me.
I was.
Did you learn anything?
I learned,
Not really. You've heard it all before, haven't you?
well,
Yeah. So I could talk about trauma for an entire class. Like I could teach a whole class on it.
we know.
Yeah. She gets tired of listening to me talk about it. So, but just keep reading, keep listening. Okay. Always keep eyes wide open, because usually if people respond a certain way, it's because something happened, right? I always say the question shouldn't be what's wrong with you. It should be what happened.
The spider's right there.
There's this, where? I see no spiders.
It was back there, but not.
I see no
It was
spiders.
it was a huge spider. It was in the pantry.
All right, guys. Well, unless you guys have any questions, we're good for today. I will send this article to you guys if you guys want to read it on your own time. I know you have enough to do, but it's been great seeing you guys. Do we need to Zoom next week? Probably not. Probably not. So probably don't need to Zoom next week, but if you guys need me, send me a text or email, okay? All right. It's great to see you guys. Please reach out if you need anything, and have a great week.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Trying to figure out how to end it.